The wind that came off the Absaroka Range in the winter of 1887 didn't blow so much as it cut. Straight through wool, straight through skin, straight through whatever fragile hope a person had managed to carry into the Montana Territory. Petra Galvin had 3 days of cornmeal left, maybe 4, if she watered it down enough that her son stopped asking what was in the pot. She had $11 hidden in the lining of her dead mother-in-law's Bible, a milk cow with a cracked hoof, and a boy of 8 named Cody who still believed, with the full faith of a child who hadn't learned better yet, that his mother always had a plan. She did not have a plan. What she found at the edge of her property line, just past the broken fence post she'd been meaning to fix since October, was not a plan either. It was a man, face down in the frozen creek bed, half buried in the overflow ice, one arm extended as if he had been reaching for something when the cold finally took him. He was dressed for hard work and harder weather, heavy canvas trousers, a buffalo hide jacket stiff with frozen blood, knee-high boots that had cracked at the soles. A battered felt hat sat 5 feet away, caught on a dead thistle like it had flown off in a hurry. Petra crouched beside him. She pressed 2 fingers to the side of his throat, expecting nothing. His pulse thumped against her fingertips, slow and struggling, but there. She looked back at the cabin. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin, pale thread. She had left Cody at the table with a piece of charcoal and a sheet of brown paper, drawing horses the way he always did when she was gone. She looked back down at the man. He had a gash along his hairline that had bled freely and frozen. There was a second wound lower, at his ribs, dark and ugly through the torn jacket. Not a fall, not an accident. Someone had done this to him and left him to let the cold finish the work. She stood up. She looked at the sky, which was the color of old pewter and getting darker. She thought of Henry, her husband, who had died of pneumonia 14 months ago, and left her this land, this debt, and this boy. Henry had been fond of saying that character was just what you did when no one was watching. There was no one watching. Petra grabbed the man under both arms and started pulling. He weighed somewhere close to 200 pounds. She weighed not quite 130. The creek bed was frozen at an angle, and every 10 yards her boots slipped on the ice, and she went down to one knee with a grunt that she refused to let become a cry. It took her the better part of an hour to drag him to the porch. By the time she hammered on the door with her boot, her vision was narrowing at the edges, and her hands had gone past cold into a strange, distant numbness. "Cody, open the door right now." The bolt scraped. The door swung in. Cody stood there with charcoal on his chin, and his eyes went very wide and very still in the way that meant he was frightened but working hard not to show it. "Mama, who is that? I don't know yet. Take his boots." Together, they got the man inside. The interior of the Galvin cabin was small and spare and brutally cold despite the fire. One main room, a sleeping loft above, a cast-iron stove that burned through wood faster than Petra could chop it. She and Cody wrestled the stranger onto the braided rug nearest the stove. He was completely unconscious. His face, when she finally got a clear look at it by firelight, was angular and weathered, probably somewhere in his late 30s, with a thick dark beard caked with ice, and the particular kind of deep lines around the eyes that came from years of squinting into open distance. She cut his jacket away with her kitchen shears. The wound at his ribs was bad, not a knife, not a fall, a bullet. The entry was clean enough, but there was no exit, which meant the lead was still inside him, and he had been losing blood steadily for what looked like several hours. She had helped Henry birth a calf that was turned wrong. She had set Cody's arm when he broke it falling from the loft 2 winters ago. She had never done this. "Cody," she said, keeping her voice level, "I need you to melt snow in the big pot and get it hot. Then bring me the sewing kit. The whole kit, not just the thread. And there's a bottle in the cedar chest. Brown glass, no label. Bring that too. What is it?" "Whiskey. Your grandfather's. Don't you dare taste it." While Cody moved, Petra worked. She cleaned around the wound as best she could with what she had. The man's temperature was dropping. She could feel it in his skin, clammy and gray. When the water came, she sterilized her husband's folding knife in the flame until the blade glowed, and then she poured 3 fingers of the whiskey over his side and held him down by the shoulder as his body arched off the floor with a sound that was more animal than human. She found the bullet against his lowest rib. She got it out with a narrow-tipped sugar tong from the kitchen drawer. When it finally came free and rang against the tin basin, she pressed her forehead to her and breathed for a count of 10. "Is he going to die?" Cody asked from behind her. "Not tonight," Petra said. She didn't know if that was true. She said it anyway. The fever arrived by midnight and stayed for 3 days. The man tossed and muttered on the floor, his massive frame radiating heat like a coal. Petra spelled cold cloths across his forehead and listened to the pieces that surfaced in his delirium. Names she didn't recognize. A woman's name, Nance, repeated twice with grief, and a word or a name that surfaced more than once with a different quality. Not grief, but something harder. Wariness, fear, Bellard. She had heard that name. Everyone in Cutter's Creek had heard it. Emery, Bellard owned the timber rights to the Upper Absaroka draws, 200,000 acres of the finest ponderosa pine in the territory. He was building a mill town. He had been buying claims along the Cutter Creek corridor for 2 years, and the ones who wouldn't sell found their fences cut and their water diverted, and, in one case that everyone talked about quietly and nobody discussed out loud, a barn burned to the ground with 3 horses in it. On the 4th morning, the stranger's eyes opened and stayed open. They were dark brown, almost black, and they came into focus slowly, taking in the low ceiling, the cramped walls, the child sitting at the table doing arithmetic, the woman crouched beside the stove with her sleeves rolled to the elbows. His right hand moved, searching. "It's here," Petra said. She lifted the leather saddlebag that had been clutched in his grip when she found him and set it within reach. Something shifted in his expression, the coiled readiness in his jaw eased by a fraction. "You're in the Galvin place," she said. 6 miles south of Cutter's Creek. I found you in my creek bed." He tried to speak. It came out as a rasp. She handed him a cup of water and watched him drink it slowly, with the careful discipline of a man who knew not to move too fast. "How long?" he managed. 4 days. He absorbed this. His gaze moved to Cody, who was watching him with frank curiosity and the unconscious courage of a child who hasn't yet learned that large wounded strangers can be dangerous. "He yours?" "Yes. Father?" "Gone. 14 months. The man closed his eyes briefly. "I'm sorry. Thank you." Petra folded her hands in her lap. "My name is Petra Galvin. You were shot. I took the bullet out. You had a fever and now you don't. I'd like to know who I've been nursing, and I'd like to know whether the men who shot you are likely to come looking." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Deacon Marsh. I'm a land surveyor. I work for the Federal Office of Territorial Affairs out of Helena." Petra kept her expression neutral. "And Bellard?" Deacon Marsh looked at her steadily. Whatever calculation he was running behind those dark eyes, it finished quickly. "You're not afraid of that name." "I'm afraid of plenty," Petra said. "But being afraid doesn't help me make decisions," he told her. It came out in pieces, slowly, the way a man talks when every breath pulls against a cracked rib. He had been commissioned by the territorial government to survey the watershed along the Upper Cutter Creek drainage, looking for inconsistencies in the existing claim records. What he found was systematic. Bellard had been falsifying the boundaries of his timber grants, pushing them east into the creek corridor, encroaching on homestead claims that predated his own filings by years. The water rights attached to those homesteads, including the Galvin claim, sat directly above the primary aquifer that fed the lower valley. Without that water, the proposed Northern Pacific spur line couldn't build its resupply depot. Without the depot, the line wouldn't come through at all. Bellard wanted the water. The railroad wanted the water, and Deacon Marsh had found the documents that proved exactly how Bellard had intended to get it. Those documents were in the saddlebag. He sent men to the ridge 2 days before you found me, Deacon said. 3 of them. I got clear of the first 2. The third one was better than I expected. A pause. I was trying to reach your property line. Seen it on the survey maps, closest shelter. Petra was quiet, looking at the fire. Then she said, My husband bought this land in 1882. He believed the water down here was the best in the territory. He believed it would make something for Cody. She looked up. 6 months after Henry died, Emery Bellard rode up here with a solicitor and a piece of paper that said Henry had borrowed $400 against the property. I had never seen that paper before. Henry had never mentioned any such debt to me. She paused. I couldn't prove it was forged. Deacon Marsh looked at her for a long moment. Then he said quietly, I can. He healed with the stubbornness of a man who had no patience for being still. By the second week he was sitting up on his own. By the third he was at the table with Cody, who had taken to watching him with the same transparent fascination he gave to the horses he drew. Something large and interesting that moved in a way he was still working out. On a Wednesday afternoon, Petra came in from the woodpile to find Deacon teaching the boy how to read a compass, the instrument flat on the table between them, Cody's head bent in concentration. If you know where north is, Deacon was explaining, you always know where you are. What if it's cloudy? Then you watch the moss on the trees. It grows thicker on the north side. What if there aren't any trees? Then you've got bigger problems than knowing where you are. Cody considered this with grave seriousness. That's not a good answer. No, Deacon agreed. It isn't. Petra turned back to the door before either of them saw the expression on her face. She had not let herself feel anything that resembled warmth in 14 months. There was no room for it. Warmth was what happened after the work was done, and the debt was paid, and the land was safe. And none of those things were true yet. But the boy had not laughed, genuinely, unself-consciously laughed. Since before Henry died, and that evening he did, at something Deacon said about a mule he'd once surveyed around in Utah, and the sound of it filled the cabin like light through a window she'd forgotten was there. That night, after Cody was in his loft, she sat across the fire from Deacon and said what had been sitting in her chest all day. Even if your documents prove the forgery on the promissory note, what then? Bellard has money. He has a lawyer in Helena and another in Billings. I have $11 and a Bible. Deacon leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. His color was better now, the gray gone from his face. I have a direct appointment with the federal land commissioner in Helena. I was supposed to report 6 weeks ago. By now they've likely sent someone to look for me, which means there's a federal inquiry already open. He paused. The documents in that bag are enough to void Bellard's entire upper grant. The forged promissory note on your land. If we can get it in front of the commissioner, it goes away. The land is unencumbered. Legally yours. That's a lot of ifs. It is. He didn't look away. I won't pretend otherwise. Petra looked into the fire. The flames had burned low, casting the room in amber and shadow. He'll find out you're alive before you reach Helena, she said. It's 6 days in good weather. I know. The passes are still closed. I know that too. Silence sat between them, not unpleasant. After a moment she said, Cody's father used to say that the most dangerous thing in the world was a man with nothing left to lose. She looked up at Deacon. I used to think he meant it as a warning. Deacon was quiet. Then, and now? Now I think he meant it as a comfort. The thaw came in patches. One morning the south-facing slope was bare brown dirt, the next 2 feet of fresh snow. The passes stayed closed. Deacon stayed, and with him came a quiet reconstruction of the daily rhythm of the cabin. He took over the wood chopping without being asked, working slowly at first against the pull of his healing ribs, then with increasing power until the woodpile doubled and the shed was full. He repaired the milk cow's stall. He rehung the cabin door, which had been letting in a draft through its lower hinge since November. Petra watched him and said nothing. What she felt was complicated, and she had no room in her life for complicated. But she felt it. It was Cody who saw them coming. He was at the window on a Tuesday morning, watching for the deer that sometimes crossed the lower field at dawn. When he went very still in the way he had learned to go still, "Mama." Petra crossed the room in 4 steps. 4 riders on the southern trail, still distant, moving at a deliberate pace that was not the pace of travelers. Beside her, she felt Deacon go still in a different way, the particular stillness of a man whose body is assessing distance and cover and odds. "How many shells in the rifle?" he asked quietly. 12. "There's another box in the chest." "Get Cody under the floor. There's no root cellar." He looked at her. "The loft, farthest corner behind the bedroll, keep him flat." He was already moving, already reaching for the Winchester that had been leaning against the wall since the day he was well enough to clean it. "Is there another way out?" "Back window, 6-foot drop. If I tell you to go, you go, both of you. Don't stop. I'm not leaving you here, Petra." "I'm not," she said simply. She went to the cedar chest and lifted out Henry's Remington rifle, checked the load with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be, and crossed to the front window. Cody was at the ladder to the loft. He looked at his mother with eyes that were 8 years old and entirely too knowing. "Come back," he said. "I always do," Petra said. She kissed the top of his head, breathed in the smell of him, soap and wood shavings and cold, and then turned back to the window. The 4 men rode into the yard with the relaxed confidence of people who expected no real resistance. The one at the front was not Bellard. Bellard was not the kind of man who rode to do his own confronting. This was someone who worked for him, broad, heavily coated, with the flat and uninflected gaze of someone hired to conclude things. The 3 behind him fanned out with the practiced ease of men who had done this before. Petra opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The lead man pulled up, surprised. He had expected a woman alone. "Mrs. Galvin," he said. "Name's Pruitt. We work for Mr. Bellard. We've reason to believe you're harboring a fugitive on this property. Man who stole documents from Mr. Bellard's private business records. We're here to retrieve the documents and take the man into custody." He said it like a legal proceeding, like it was already finished. "If you hand them both over, there's no trouble here. There's no one here but me and my son," Petra said, "and you're trespassing." Pruitt smiled without warmth. "Now, ma'am, don't make this harder than it needs to be." From the shadows of the doorway behind her, Deacon stepped into view. Pruitt's horse shied. The men behind him stiffened. "Those documents were commissioned by the Office of Territorial Affairs," Deacon said, his voice carrying flat and clear across the yard. "They are federal property. The survey work they contain exposes criminal misrepresentation of land grants under the Homestead Act and the Timber Culture Act. If you take one step toward this cabin, you are interfering with a federal investigation. Every man here will hang for it." A long silence. The horses moved restlessly. Pruitt's smile was gone. He looked at the woman on the porch with the rifle at her side, and the large man in the doorway who should have been dead in a creek bed 2 weeks ago, and he ran a calculation. "This isn't over," he said. "It will be," Deacon replied, "when the federal commissioner gets my report." Pruitt held for a moment longer, then he turned his horse and rode. The 3 behind him followed, not quickly enough to look afraid, but steadily enough to look decided. Petra waited until they were gone from sight. Then she lowered the Remington and let out a breath that she had been holding since Cody came to the window. She heard Deacon come up behind her. He stopped close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "They'll go to Bellard," he said quietly. "I know. He won't send Pruitt back. He'll come himself. I know that too." A pause. "We need to get those documents to Helena, then we go." She turned to look at him. "How fast can you ride?" They left at first light, all 3 of them. Deacon on his recovered gelding, Petra on the Galvin mare. Cody bundled between her and the saddle, with the saddlebag buckled to Deacon's back. They rode the high trail, the one that added 4 miles but avoided the valley floor where Bellard's men would be watching the road. The cold was absolute, and the sky above the peaks was the blue-black of deep water. Bellard caught them on the 2nd day. He came himself, as Deacon had predicted, a trim man in an expensive coat, with 4 men at his back and the polished certainty of someone who had never been told no by anyone who could make it stick. He blocked the trail at the narrow cut above Sentinel Creek, his horse positioned sideways across the path. "Marsh," he said pleasantly, "you are a remarkably difficult man to kill. I've noticed that myself." Deacon said. Bellard's eyes moved to Petra. Something shifted in them, not quite respect, not quite contempt. Somewhere in between. "Mrs. Galvin, your husband was a reasonable man when he wasn't being stubborn. I had hoped you would be easier." He paused. "This doesn't have to end badly for you. Give me the survey record. Walk away from the property. I'll clear the note and give you $500 on top. You can take the boy somewhere warm." Petra looked at him. She thought about Henry. She thought about the promissory note she had never seen before, with Henry's signature that wasn't quite right in the curve of the H. She thought about 14 months of rationing cornmeal and sleeping in her coat and telling Cody that things were going to get better. "Emery," she said, using his given name deliberately. "How did you forge my husband's signature? Did you practice it, or did you just think I wouldn't look closely?" Bellard's pleasant expression held for exactly 2 seconds after that. Then it was gone. "Take the bag," he said to his men. What happened next was fast and ugly and not elegant in any way that the stories would later tell it. Deacon put himself between the riders and Petra before they had closed half the distance, his gelding turning with a precision that didn't look like panic. The first 2 men pulled up short when they saw the Winchester already out. The third came around the left flank. Petra heard him before she saw him, and she swung the mare hard, cutting him off at the tree line with the Remington leveled at his chest. "Don't," she said. He didn't. The 4th man made the mistake of reaching for his pistol in Deacon's direct line of sight. The shot from the Winchester took the gun clean out of his hand. Not through it, just the barrel, spinning the weapon into the snow. The man clutched his hand and swore. Bellard had backed his horse to the far edge of the cut. The pleasant man was entirely gone now. What was left was something smaller and meaner and far less sure of itself. "I will ruin you," he said, and he was looking at Petra when he said it. "Everything you've tried to build here, every acre, every Mr. Bellard." Deacon's voice was quiet and final. "Federal marshals are meeting us in Helena in 4 days. Every document in this bag has been logged with the territorial office as of my last correspondence, before your men found me. If anything happens to Mrs. Galvin, to her son, or to this land, the first place the investigation goes is to you. Not your lawyers. You." He paused. "Ride back down. Get yourself a good attorney. That's the only advice I have for you." Bellard rode down. He didn't speak again. The marshals were waiting in Helena, as promised. The federal land commissioner reviewed the survey documents over the course of 3 days. The forged promissory note. Once Deacon identified the irregularities in the surveyor marks around the Galvin property that directly contradicted Bellard's filing dates, was formally voided. Emery Bellard was indicted on 4 counts of land fraud, 2 counts of falsification of federal documents, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit violence against a federal officer. The Northern Pacific's land agent found Petra on a Thursday morning, 2 weeks after she arrived in Helena. He was polite and businesslike, and very clearly uncomfortable with how directly she looked at him. The Galvin property, he explained, sat directly above the best documented freshwater aquifer in the Cutter Creek corridor. The Northern Pacific needed water rights, not the land itself, just the water access, to build the resupply depot that would make the Billings spur viable. He named a number. Petra made him name a higher one. She got it. She rode back to Cutter's Creek in the first week of April, when the snow was still thick on the upper slopes, but the valley floor had gone soft and brown and smelled of thaw and turned earth. Cody rode beside her, taller somehow than he had been in February. Or maybe she was just seeing him more clearly. Deacon had ridden with them from Helena as far as the junction at Stillwater River. He had a government appointment in Miles City. He had 4 more valleys to survey before summer. He had said all of this the night before, over supper, in a Helena boarding house, with the careful, detailed manner of a man laying out facts in order to avoid feeling them. Petra had let him finish. Then she had said, "The northern draws will still be there in August." He had looked at her across the table. "I'm not going back to Missouri," she said. "I'm not going anywhere. I built something in that valley, and I'm going to go on building it. And it would be—" She stopped, started again. "Cody needs someone to teach him how to shoot properly. And the south fence still needs mending. And I have not asked anyone for a single thing in 14 months. She set her hands flat on the table. "I'm asking now." Deacon Marsh, who had survived 2 bullets and 3 days of fever and 4 of Bellard's riders, was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "The draws will keep." He turned his horse south at the Stillwater Junction, not north toward Miles City. When Petra rode into the yard of the Galvin property that April morning, the woodpile was still full. The cow's stall still held. The door hung true on its hinges. She stood on the porch for a moment, looking at the land. The brown meadow going soft at the edges, the creek running clear and cold where she had found a half-dead man in the ice, the dark pines on the ridge above holding the last of the snow, the land Henry had loved, the land she had nearly lost, the land that had turned out to be worth exactly what he always said it was, just not in the way either of them had imagined. Cody came up beside her and tucked himself under her arm the way he had when he was smaller, his head fitting neatly under her chin. "Are we staying?" he asked. "We're staying," Petra said. Behind them they heard the sound of a horse coming up the southern trail.